My name is James Greer. Hello, I'm Alex Marlowe.
My name is Anna.
My name is Fajir Rahman.
My name is Matt.
Matt, you are duly elected as Union President.
Good evening and welcome to the first edition of the Exec Forum, live from LSU Media's Centre. The Exec Forum is designed to give you, Loughborough students, the opportunity to gain a better understanding of the decisions taken by the executive team. Now, as a result of the national lockdown, we're here in the Media Centre holding this remotely, following national broadcasting guidelines, with us all socially distanced here in the Media Centre. But in the future, we hope to field questions from students in person. So tonight, I'm joined by three members of the LSU executive team: Matt, our union president; Anna, our education executive officer; and Alex, our welfare and diversity executive officer. So tonight's questions have been sent in and written by Loughborough students. So this is just a reminder for everyone at home that this is your opportunity to ask your executive team any questions that you may want to know the answers to. And to get involved, tweet in at LSU Media using the hashtag #ExecForum. So to start, guys, I'd like to give each of you a brief opportunity to introduce yourselves. Let's start with Matt.
Thank you very much, Josh. Good evening, everybody. Can I start off by thanking all of the volunteers in LSU Media for being able to pull off what has undoubtedly been a challenging event to plan this during these current circumstances. But I hope you all agree that it's well worth tuning into this evening. So, as Josh said, I am Matt Youngs. I'm the president of Loughborough Students' Union. And together with Alex and Anna, we make up the executive, which is a group of 11 elected officers. So that's 5 executive officers: the president, vice president, education executive officer, welfare and diversity executive officer, and the sport executive officer. Alongside that, we have 6 section chairs representing Action, Enterprise, RAG, Media, Societies, and the Athletic Union Clubs Officer. Now, this executive started their positions in August, and it's probably been a very unusual first 4 months for them. Certainly, for all of us, it was a year we were not expecting to be experiencing when we were first elected in February. But that said, I'm proud and pleased to say that all of them have taken this year and the obstacles that have come about in their stride. And as a result, LSU is in a fantastic place going forward. Yes, there have been challenges along the way. Yes, we are continuing to learn and adapt in the current circumstances. That said, we've been able to deliver a freshers, which has been amazing given the circumstance and the challenges associated with it. We were in the minority of students' unions who decided not to deliver a 100% digital freshers. And the success of the socially distanced social club on Shirley Pierce Square meant that we brought it back in 2 iterations, in the Union Car Park as the Enchanted Forest, and in Fusion as well as the Lost City. For all of our sectional activity, it's been a digital web possible approach. And that's meant that together with our commercial outlet means that LSU is really turning a corner, and one that is matching and meeting the needs of the changing Loughborough demographic. I'm pleased to say that we've worked closely with the university to monitor COVID-19 cases, and indeed yesterday, for the first time since students returned, we didn't record a single new case in halls, which is a fantastic achievement, and Loughborough indeed is being used as a blueprint for all universities for good practice. And LSU is at the heart of that. We've got representation at gold and silver level, both in the Students' Union and at the university, to ensure that your views are continuing to be put across and your voice is still being heard despite the challenging circumstances. So I look forward to hearing your questions tonight, and I'll let the rest of the team introduce themselves.
Thank you, Matt. Next, we'll go to Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to quickly echo what Matt has been saying. Thank you so much to our fantastic volunteers for organizing this. Thank you all of you for joining in as well. In terms of what I do, I'm Anna, as I've mentioned, Education Executive Officer. Very quickly, what that means is that I am the designated student representative on academic matters at all levels of study, UG, PGT, and postgraduate research as well. I do so by liaising with university and union colleagues on one hand, and then championing different senior volunteer groups within education, from academic representation, peer support, as well as school/departmental committees. It's safe to say that it's been a very different year for learning, teaching, and our research provision. But what I have tried to do alongside my volunteers and the staff that I work with is ensure that our university upholds learning, teaching, and research at the highest of standards possible. As Matt has mentioned, I am one of the student representatives, if not the student representative on Silver Group within the university, where I get to feedback on learning and teaching provision for our undergraduate and postgraduate students on a weekly basis. And I also ensure that I get to liaise with my volunteers in a similar manner as well.
Thank you, Anna. And finally, Alex.
Thank you very much, Josh. Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to again echo the thanks for this fantastic opportunity. I think it's such a great idea. I'm very much looking forward to the evening. So I'm the Welfare and Diversity Executive Officer. This means that I am the student representative for all matters relating to welfare, diversity, well-being, and inclusion. I do that at Loughborough Students' Union. I am the student representative lead, and also in meetings and liaising with colleagues at the university, I am the designated student representative for welfare and diversity. Alongside this, I also head the section Welfare and Diversity, run by passionate student volunteers, totaling 12, covering everything from LGBT+, ethnic minorities, postgraduate representation. I'm also supported by the wonderful Alison and my own deputy. It certainly has been such a strange way to start the year, but I'm very, very proud to be part of a very talented executive team, and also very, very proud to be part of the Welfare and Diversity section, who have been delivering a mostly digital offering, but we do have occasions where we are exempt from the certain restrictions for certain support group purposes, where we can have meetings for up to 15 people, which in these unprecedented times where mental health and well-being is certainly exacerbated, are of the utmost importance. Thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of the evening.
Well, thank you very much for your introductions. So our first section is going to be run by Matt, giving an overview of the year so far. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Josh. And just to build on and provide a bit more detail as to the things that I touched on in my introduction. So those of you that are returning students, so second years and beyond, will realise and recognise that campus and the Students' Union is a very, very different place this year to what it has been in previous years. For those of you who are first years joining us, it is, of course, a very different place and a very different world at the moment. But LSU has been adapting to it just like every other organisation and indeed higher education institution. What is different about LSU and the Student Union as a concept, though, is that change and managing that change is being run and delivered by 11 officers, some of whom are still students completing a placement year or indeed doing it voluntarily, and others will have only just graduated, which means that we've got a very, very young average age. But the people that are making those decisions, and indeed some of the decisions that are made, are having significant financial implications. So we're making decisions that will implicate millions of pounds. But to be able to do that is an absolute pleasure. And whilst it may seem a bit of a scary concept that we have an organisation that is effectively being run by 11 20-year-olds or 20-plus-year-olds, actually it provides a really vibrant, exciting atmosphere because we can only run for up to 2 years. It means that it's constantly changing. It's a really dynamic environment to work in. And all of the officers have different specialisms. Each of them will have potentially a section to focus on, or indeed a remit that works with university and college colleagues. But that said, when we come together as the executive, we are all the driving force behind Loughborough Students' Union as a whole. And as a result of this year and the implications associated with COVID-19, we have had to adapt our sectional output and indeed the output from the Students' Union as a whole. And I want to just touch on a few things that sprung to mind when I was reflecting on the 4 months that we've completed so far as the executive of 2020-2021. And it's undoubtedly been challenging. But if I take, for example, Action, our volunteering section, yes, a lot of the projects we have had to transition to digital delivery or indeed suspend for the time being until we can do it in a much safer environment. But that means that we've been able to alter the way in which we deliver things. Our soup kitchen is still running, serving users of the local community who need support now more than ever. Alongside that, projects that would historically have seen volunteers going into care homes, which have been hitting the news, of course, in the last few months, we've adapted that, recognising that vulnerable members of our local community still need the tangible support that something like LSU Action provides. And we've been doing that by doing a pen pal scheme, a digital pen pal scheme, through our Contact the Elderly project. Alongside that, RAG, our fundraising section, have been delivering digital rates, and indeed some of you who are keen eyes on social media will have noticed that it's Movember at the moment, and I'm pleased to say that Hetty, our RAG chair, has been delivering a fantastic Movember campaign alongside collaborative work with Heads Up, the Mental Health Association within Welfare University, the Athletic Union, and today we surpassed £30,000 that has been raised. Testament, therefore, to the hard work of all the volunteers and proof that, despite the challenging circumstances, students will still rally together and do their utmost for students and the local community. So that said, it's been challenging and there have been hurdles along the way. And yes, the Students' Union has done some difficult decisions and taken some difficult actions. And something that springs to mind, certainly in the early days of the executive, was the visit of the Prime Minister in late August and the social media storm that created. And undoubtedly, LSU learned some pretty hard and fast lessons in that moment. And yes, we could have done things better, but I absolutely stand by our decision to host the Prime Minister, because if we are to engage and make change at every single level, be that local or national, we need to be engaging with people like this. And therefore, by engaging with the Prime Minister at that point, it's opened up doors and avenues for us to explore change that we can hopefully enact across the country, not just in Loughborough, really setting Loughborough Students' Union apart through the impact it has on students. Now, as we look towards the end of the first term, we've been supporting students in self-isolation, the launch of our COVID Community Champion Scheme. Some of you tuning in tonight, I'm sure, will have benefited from it or indeed be volunteers of the scheme. And to date, we've delivered up to 1,500 deliveries and requests from students, be that parcels, prescriptions, printing, library books, groceries. And recently, we've also added free feminine hygiene products. And that was a scheme that was delivered and fully operational within 48 hours. And that is testament to the hard work of the volunteers and the executive, and proof that if you want to find a dynamic environment to work and thrive in, Loughborough Students' Union is absolutely the place to be. Now, I don't want to touch too much on Welfare University or education, because I'll let Alex and Anna come on to that respectively. But if any of you have not considered getting involved in Loughborough Students' Union yet, I highly encourage you to have a look at our website, lsu.co.uk. The amount of opportunities available to you are endless. And when it comes to a university or indeed a college life, university and college life is the perfect time to get involved, because you have the freedom, the flexibility to pursue any interest that you may have, be it through societies, media, sport, anything you can think of. Loughborough Students' Union will cater for you. And if you can't find something that fits your niche or your interest, we will help you to facilitate that experience as well, because we are all about providing opportunities for students and developing those that want to get involved with those that we facilitate. So I'll stop there before we turn to more questions. So Josh, back to you.
Thank you, Matt. So let's go to our first question section. No? Okay, so first question for Matt. Why are the section chairs not invited onto this?
I'm hoping that I can lip read there because I couldn't catch your question, Josh. There was no sound coming through. I shall attempt to make pleasant small talk whilst we fix the sound there.
Yep, Matt. So first question, why are the section chairs not invited onto this? And can you explain the difference in responsibilities between the two teams?
Anna, can you hear Josh?
Yes, can you hear me, Matthew?
I can't hear anybody.
Oh,
interesting. If you give me 30 seconds.
Okay, so Matt, we will go to Anna's questions. Anna, if you can hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me, Josh? I'm just double checking, sorry.
That's all good. So Anna, the first question for you. What has the union done to support students academically in an online world?
So I think I'm going to go back to what we've kind of been discussing so far. Being able to be the student representative on Silver Group within the university means I get to interact with, for example, the associate deans of teaching for all our 9 schools at both campuses as well. Where possible, I have tried to ensure that student feedback that I receive from my different teams, especially within academic representation, with an emphasis on the UG and PGT school presidents, is continuously fed back into what Silver Group is considering in terms of communicating sabbatical officer that continuously tries to feedback and ensure that the student voice is put at the heart of any decision that has been made by the university.
And follow up to that, do you challenge the university on a regular basis, and can you give a recent example?
Absolutely. I think it's fair to assume that Loughborough Students' Union should be a critical friend to the university, but friend means student-staff partnership as well. It is very, very important that we foster a healthy student-staff partnership with our university colleagues because that really allows us to open doors towards improvements. In terms of challenging them on things that they have been talking about, I have recently been having conversations with them regarding the mitigating circumstances arrangements that are going to be put in place for students regarding COVID. And we've been having that conversation all throughout last week, and we'll continue to have that conversation all throughout this week as well. I think it's important to kind of ensure that students know that I don't do that on my own. I always consult with union colleagues, for example, Nikki Conway, who's our head of advice and academic representation over here, especially when it comes to university level challenges that are brought forward. On another kind of level, Professor Rachel Thompson joins in on our joint school president meetings where we have the UG and PGT school presidents together, just to make sure that she receives direct feedback on what the students are feeling, what the students are experiencing, and any challenges that they might be bringing forward throughout the conversations.
Thank you. And the next question is, are there going to be future strikes from the UCU, and what would LSU's stance be?
The very honest answer, I am not sure. The main purpose of strike as a movement is that they do not have to tell us that there are going to be strikes. What we have done this year is that Matt and I tend to stay involved and engaged with UCU representatives throughout the year. We have been doing so since freshers and have tried to really maintain that connection and keep that conversation going. So I'm not sure whether there will be any other strikes. When it comes to what we're going to be doing, I think last year has taught us that we can have other kind of ways to view this situation. As far as I'm concerned, for me, it's very important that students understand what our fellow staff are striking for, and that understand what implications that would have at Loughborough Uni, and not only that, but nationally as well. In terms of what I try to do from my side, I try to stay educated and informed through different ways, really, by keeping in touch with what UCU is doing nationally through their through kind of the communication that is sent through by Joe Grady, their secretary, and really make sure I keep up to date with these conversations. And alongside that, I have started to meet with a fellow education or variation of the education executive officer at some other unions as well, just to make sure we keep each other in the loop and that we share good practice. And this is one of the topics that has come up in conversation. But I think that has kind of shifted away from that conversation towards learning and teaching provision through COVID, if that makes sense. Once I do know more information, I will make sure to let students know, and we can have a conversation together and make a decision together really on this.
And then follow up to that is, do you believe that that is the best position to take in order to support students if strikes did occur?
So perhaps I should state that a bit more clearly. What we have done in the past is that we remained in a neutral position, which differed a bit from what has happened roughly 3 years ago, I think. So 2 predecessors away from me, when the union has kind of went with the university's way of going about it. Instead of doing that, what we've decided is to place ourselves in a neutral position, but neutral does not mean standing by. It means being able to listen to both stakeholders and really ensuring that the student voice is represented within both of these conversations. In terms of what we're going to be doing this time around, should strikes happen, I would like to take a bit of a different approach, whereby the executive officers and I consult with particularly academic representation, senior volunteers, so school presidents, as well as our doctoral researcher lead reps, to ensure we have a really good understanding of what implications would be for either side, really, because it's important that the student voice is always consulted and that we draw our conclusions and make educated decisions based on what our students are saying.
Thank you for that. Our next question is, what effect do you think online lectures have had to academic performance, and what have you done to ensure that these limits to our education are mitigated?
So I think the effect really comes from different external and internal factors. It's not only determined by the fact that students have had to learn remotely. Surprisingly, I think some students, despite popular belief, probably have chosen this as well as a mean to interact with their academic matters, really. I think what's kind of important to stress out is that as long as our students feel like they are getting their intended learning outcomes that they have signed up on a program or a course to get, then this is kind of the main determinant of whether they are getting the education that they should be getting. Obviously, I do think the pandemic we're going through has had an impact on our students, and that varies from case to case, but the general anxiety that has been felt throughout our student body is something that I always ensure that academics are made aware of, especially senior staff, senior management staff with the university, because it's always important to stress out that just because someone is not experiencing the worst case scenario, it does not mean that they're not impacted by what is happening. So in terms of what I've done, I think I'd like to say that I've been championing this, and I have been trying my very best to make sure that staff are always made aware of what those implications are. And to kind of flip the coin a bit, I have also tried for the same senior management team to ensure that they understand that this anxiety is also felt throughout our staff cohort, and that when we make decisions, we take into considerations what kind of impact they would have on both our students and our staff, really overall, because I think it's important to make sure all stakeholders that would be impacted by any decision made are really taken into consideration when anything is going ahead, really.
Thank you for that. Our next question is, postgraduate research representation has always been an issue for LSU. How have you ensured they have as strong a voice as everyone else? And what actions is LSU taking to improve the postgraduate research experience?
Thank you very much for that, Josh. So in terms of what we've been doing, or at least what I've been trying to do, I think that's a twofolded answer, really. On one hand, with my new executive team, for those that are tuning in and haven't heard from me before, I'm a returning sabbatical officer that has stayed in the same role for 2 years. And what I've learned through my first year as a sabbatical officer is that more often than not, when the word postgraduate came out of anyone or in any kind of conversations, all eyes would be on me, which I don't think is the right way to go. It's important that people understand that when it comes to representation for postgraduate communities, both PGT and PGR, but for the purpose of this exercise for researchers, people understand that that means all executive officers should have a say in it and should try to improve and should really improve upon their own work to ensure that they represent students. So I think that has been done. I have seen incredible progress. I have seen so many of our executive officers being proactive active and asking me questions and kind of seeing me as a guide, as well as my team, especially within academic representation. In terms of what I've done myself, I have tried to really strengthen the academic representation scheme that we run for our doctoral researchers. As I've mentioned, we now have fortnightly meeting with our doctoral researcher president team. I have also placed one of our doctoral researcher presidents on Senate, which is the highest governing body / committee at the university, just to make sure they get that extra input into matters that are brought into Senate based on learning, teaching, and research provision. And overall, I have really tried to ensure that I continuously listen to our lead reps and our reps, and especially our presidents, when it comes to facilitating anything that they would like for us to bring forward or discuss with the university.
Thank you for that. And following on, what support are you offering for parents doing doctoral degrees, and if you think you could do better?
I think there's always room for improvement, Josh. This is something we should all acknowledge and we should all be aware of. As a predominantly undergraduate campus, it's more often than not quite easy to overlook some of the students that come through our doors that may be experiencing a completely different world and a completely different academic journey as well. In terms of what we've been doing, I have actually been encouraging and liaising with the doctoral researcher president team, who has recently written a formal kind of statement / letter to all senior management teams across our campuses, including DDPs, our Associate Deans of Research, Steve Rothberg, who is our Pro-Vice Chancellor for research, as well as Professor Liz Peel, who is our Associate Vice Chancellor for the Doctoral College. This has been signed by different lead reps and reps. And what we're doing next is we're going to be meeting with university colleagues to discuss through some of the recommendations that have come through the doctoral researcher reps. And we will make sure to take actions based on the conversations that we'll be having with them next week.
Thanks for that. And the next one. What has LSU done to support postgraduate researchers and doctoral researcher students whose funding and studies have been heavily disrupted by COVID, especially given a recent UKRI announcement made last Thursday that doctoral researchers are not eligible for a blanket extension?
Absolutely right. So when it comes to the UKRI announcement that has been made, I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but I hope that this is the message that is coming across. I am in constant and continuous conversations with our doctoral researcher president team, because I do not want to pretend to be an expert, nor should I. This is why they're here as senior volunteers and the people that are driving academic representation within our doctoral researcher community. So in a very similar manner, we have been addressing this with university colleagues. We're waiting to meet with them next week, and we will be going through these and we will be further discussing this. The question imposed to senior university colleagues has been, what are we doing as an institution to better support our students that are supported through the UKRI scheme? And is there anything more we should be doing as an institution? Even if it's done nationally, I think we should be leading on this, and we should really set an example in terms of what we should be doing. I think from a union point of view, I think this is kind of the answer. Just continuously having those conversations with university colleagues based on educated kind of decisions made with the lead reps, with the reps, and the doctoral researcher president team, as well as my staff within academic representation.
Excellent. And finally, since this has been on your manifesto twice, have you ensured that all school inductions have included an introduction to LSU, and have you introduced departmental education days?
Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to kind of take them one by one. I will focus on the one that didn't go ahead the way it should have. Obviously, due to COVID-19 implications, department/education days have not been possible, really. We have, in many cases, actually, what schools and departments have done is they facilitated their inductions online. So they've done so remotely, which obviously leaves little to no room for an actual physical event to take place. But based on examples from the year before, when this has been very successful, this is still a suggestion that is going to go straight with my successor in terms of something that they should definitely be doing. When it comes to representation within inductions, all schools have been particularly asked to engage with the school president, peer support student coordinator, and designated chair for that particular department or school, and that they are included and helped to really facilitate conversations with their students in the inductions. And additionally, they've been sent a talking head video by the executive officers explaining their roles, an additional one from me explaining what education does and how we have a positive impact, hopefully, on the academic and student experience of students within learning communities.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna. So next we're going to try and return to Matt. So Matt, your first question. Why are the section chairs not invited onto this edition of the Exec Forum? And can you explain to us the difference in responsibilities between the two teams?
Thank you very much, Josh. I'm back. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Yes, so I think it's better to start by tackling the second question, and then hopefully that answer informs the first question. So if we think about the difference between executive officers and section chairs, the 5 executive officers, alongside their role-specific responsibilities, are trustees of the organisation and therefore are involved in all of the decision-making processes that take the organisation, LSU as a whole, forwards. And therefore, when it comes to section chairs, their remit is much more sectional specific. They are tasked with developing and improving their sectional operation and delivery. And as a result, when it first came to thinking about how we might conceive the Exec Forum in its current iteration, it was thought that students would often want to hear about the high-level union-wide decisions and indeed university-wide decisions that are being made. And therefore, for this first version of the Exec Forum, we decided to go with Anna as the Education Executive Officer, because obviously academia and learning and teaching is high up on the agenda at any university, particularly when there have been ramifications associated with COVID-19. And then also bringing in Alex from a welfare and diversity's perspective, because of course, mental health and mental well-being is so important all the time, but it's been felt all the more acutely during COVID-19. And that means that going forwards into other exec forums that we'll hopefully hold in the future, fingers crossed they can take place in person, it means we'll be able to bring more executive officers into the conversation. But what I hope to see from this is that as it develops and as the exec forum grows and matures, we may be able to introduce section chairs as well, because it may get to the point where actually we've got a load of questions that are coming in specifically about enterprise, and therefore it'd be really useful to get Manny on board as well. So whilst this is only the first version of the exec forum, I'm sure it's going to grow and develop from here, and that may include section chairs as well.
Thank you, Matt. So the next question is, as president, what's the most important thing that you do, and what have you done this year to champion students to the university?
Gosh, that's an excellent question, and I hope it's been submitted by a student that is contemplating running for president. If it hasn't, then I suggest that all viewers do have a look at all of the executive officer roles and think about running in the exec elections, because it is a truly fantastic job. So in my role as president, it's sort of training yourself to be a little bit here, a little bit there, because it's very different compared to a lot of the other officers, isn't it? I don't have a section to look after. The union is my section, as it were, and therefore my responsibilities are to guide and mentor all of the other officers whilst maintaining those key stakeholder relationships between the local community, including the council and the police, and then also the university, obviously our highest and largest partner institution. So I think for me, one of the most exciting but also challenging aspects of the role is reacting to the unforeseen events and all of the things that you don't expect when you first get elected, not least a pandemic, but also all of the challenges associated and that are brought with that. And I think I touched on it in my introduction as well, but being able to respond to events that you really, really don't expect. And I reflect again on the flashpoint associated with the Prime Minister's bit of it. And whilst in hindsight is of course a wonderful thing, in that instance, all of the officers looked to me as the lead of the executive, but also the lead student representative, and ensuring that I was able to rally them together, because for many of them, Anna's already touched on the fact that she is a returning officer, and I'm fortunate enough to be a second-year officer as well, but for many of them, it was their first exposure to the backlash associated with being a public figure, and therefore the responsibility of the president in that moment is to support and mentor all of them to ensure that if anybody is taking the flak and taking the blame, as it were, that it is the president. And my job is to shield and support the rest of the team. And that's why the subsequent statements that we put out were all delivered by myself on behalf of the executive. So actually, weirdly, it's one of my skill sets, and it's one of the areas of work I most enjoy, which is reacting to the unknown and having to make those crunch decisions. And then when I think about how I'm supporting and liaising with senior university colleagues, obviously I work most closely with the Vice Chancellor, but also the Chief Operating Officer and others in the Vice Chancellor's office. And for me this year, it was recognising that whilst it is absolutely so vital that we keep on representing student views and ensure that we critically challenge and critically feed back to the university about the views of students. Actually, this year, when it came to the link between Loughborough Students' Union, Loughborough University and Loughborough College, that link was so vital this year because it was so important that we prioritise getting support to students right before we start to critically challenge the university. That can obviously still take place, and indeed it is still doing so at all the university committees and meetings that we have. But actually, it's so important that we preserve the links with the university because we need them just as much as they need us.
Thank you, Matt. And just a quick reminder to our viewers at home that if you have any questions that you want me to put to our executive team, please tweet us at LSU Media using the hashtag #ExecForum. So Matt, our next question is related to your manifesto. In your manifesto, you said you would assess current security arrangements, including Showcase, and that you would increase the support for halls and departmental committees. What has been done on either of these?
Okay, great question. So, as with all of the officers at the time of writing, it was set to be a very different year to what it turned out to be. That said, I'm pleased to say that I've made progress on both manifesto commitments. When I talk about the role of security and ShowSec at an organisation like LSU, I grew up as a student who was surrounded by student security. When it came to student security numbers, we had to top that up as a legal requirement with externally sourced security companies, including ShowSec as we currently use. And I wanted to critically review them because I thought it was important that as a students' union, we champion students wherever possible. And I'm pleased to say that we have set up a series of project management boards, creating a critical reflection of all of the union's internal processes. And when I came to assess and reflect on why we needed to rely on ShowSec, actually it came down to the fact that maybe our recruitment processes for student staff weren't sufficient. And as a result, one of the project management boards that we've set up is specifically related to targeting the recruitment process and ensuring that our student staff are getting the best support possible. Because at the end of the day, they're still employees of the organisation, and therefore they should be treated in exactly the same way as every other employee is as well. So whilst I can't make a sweeping change like clicking my fingers and seeing ShowSec disappear overnight, simply because at the moment the resources aren't available for a students' union in the middle of the pandemic. What we are doing is making progress when it comes to conceptualising why we are having to rely on them more and more, which means that going forward and in subsequent years, long after I have left LSU, it means that we can continue and start championing student staff again so that that balance can start to be addressed. And it won't be an overnight change. It will be something that happens over years. But I hope in 5-10 years' time, we can still be championing student staff and ensuring that we are putting them first whenever we've got a choice to. And so to come on to the second point around hall and departments, as Anna has already touched on when it comes to an academic point of view, we are so reliant on our hall and departments and the volunteers that we've got in them, because now more than ever, creating that community for students is so vital, because it is going to be so difficult at the moment for them to be able to create them on their own with all the social distancing measures in place. And therefore, when it came to the start of the year, I was really keen on ensuring that we preserve the existing links that we've got with halls in particular, but also departments as well through Anna's work. And I am more than happy to hold my hands up here, and certainly when it comes to halls, say that as a students' union, we didn't get it right sometimes during freshers. We did make some bad decisions. We made some wrong calls. And I hope that we have learned from them going forwards, because at the end of the day, we need to be valuing our halls and departments just as much as any other level and area of sectional activity, because they are some of our biggest stakeholders. And for halls, it is a challenging environment to work in, because halls find themselves in the difficult middle ground where they sort of exist on university property, but they are a union activity and a union entity. And we need to be supporting them more and more, which is why going forward and going into semester 2 and the new calendar year,
I want to make it a priority that when we are introducing our new hall committees and indeed our new department committees as we approach the end of the academic year, we are providing them with the best support possible, because at the moment it hasn't been good enough.
Thank you for that, Matt. And the next question is, how does the exec know what the students want? Who do you speak to?
That's a great question. And honestly, if I could go out onto campus every single week and talk to 18,000 students, I would do. And the trouble is, it's just not possible, which is where, as an organisation, we are so reliant on our feedback mechanisms. And what the challenge for LSU to do is to diversify those feedback mechanisms. And we, at the moment, rely on elected bodies of students, such as the Democracy and Representation Committee, whose role is to streamline all of those views and create a concise committee that is reflective and representative of every single student on campus and can bring all of their viewpoints to the table so that we can work with the Democracy and Representation Committee as an executive to implement those ideas, suggestions, and work on feedback that is received from them. And then additionally, we're also reliant on all of our sectional volunteers in the education world, in the welfare and diversity world, also sport, enterprise, so on and so on, because those are the students that have really got their fingers on the pulse when it comes to the student mood, because they're on the ground, they're creating events, creating opportunities and getting feedback straight away. And in an age and a world of social media, we're also reliant on social media. And whilst there are innumerable number of student groups out there and groups that offer critical reflections and feedback all the time, we have got to pick and choose them, because whilst at the end of the day there is so much to comment on here at Loughborough, as an executive we've only really got 12 months to implement those ideas, which is where we're hoping to streamline all of that and all of that commentary and comment that is taking place on social media, streamline that and feed it into the Ideas Forum, which Fajiro, the Vice President, has launched in the last week or so. And we're seeing really good feedback from students on that already. We're seeing ideas being submitted that are then getting hundreds of votes. And that means that we can go, actually, this is something that students are talking about and I want to implement that idea.
Excellent, thank you, Matt. And the next question, do you believe that lobbying Boris Johnson about issues you haven't asked the student population about was the right thing to do? And do you think that political lobbying extends beyond your mandate?
Another excellent question. If I take the first one first and reflect on whether I should be lobbying the Prime Minister on an issue I haven't consulted the students on, I would actually argue against that and say that as the elected student representative, as the prime elected student representative as present, I would hope that students have confidence and trust in me to be having those conversations, knowing that I'm acting on their best interests. Because as I said in my response to the previous question, whilst I'd love to be able to talk to 18,000 students every single week, it's not just possible, which is why the executive exists. They are elected student representatives. It shouldn't be a case of us against them. It should be that a student looks at myself as president or looks at any other officer on the executive team and goes, yes, I'm pleased that I voted for them, or indeed I'm pleased that they were elected, because they are acting on my best interests. And this comes back to something that we were already working on as an executive last academic year when I was Welfare and Diversity Executive Officer alongside Anna as Education Executive Officer. And at the time when the Black Lives Matter movement was starting to get traction after the terrible events in America, we decided at the time to write to our local MP and state that we weren't happy as a student union with the position that the government was currently taking on a number of matters, and we got feedback from that, and that's exactly what we did again when it came to the Prime Minister's visit, because it is so important when you have an opportunity like that to absolutely grasp it. And I hope that students look at that moment and go, yes, he's a controversial figure, but Boris Johnson is a controversial figure. The Prime Minister is the highest elected government figure in the United Kingdom, and therefore I will absolutely grasp that opportunity to lobby them. And then that flows on to your next question, which was, should a students' union and indeed the executive be lobbying a political party when Loughborough Students' Union is not your typical students' union when it comes to sort of having campaigns that are critically against the university or critically against wider society matters? We're not like that. That's not the Loughborough way of doing stuff. But actually, we still get those messages across because we still have those conversations and we still create those opportunities to hold roundtable discussions. because those conversations are so critically important to get right that it doesn't matter what medium in which you do them, you still have to have them in the first place.
Excellent, thank you, Matt. So our next set of questions are dedicated to Alex. So Alex, if you can hear me. Your first question, as welfare EO, do you believe it was right to be stood with Boris Johnson in a photo? Did you speak to him and what did you discuss?
So a very, very good question. I completely stand by Matt's sentiments, but I'll give you a different angle that I saw the Prime Minister's visit as. So there are a few streams of activism, which is a way of lobbying for change that I strongly believe has a place in every sector. You can be an activist by marching on the streets. You can be an activist by having conversations with colleagues. You can be an activist having high-level conversations with high-level colleagues. In the situation where the Prime Minister visited Loughborough Students' Union, in that instance, it's an absolutely fundamental example of what activism can be. You are allowed to use your privilege as an elected student member, someone who has definitely authority and weight in the conversation, and you have the Prime Minister on campus. You should absolutely seize that opportunity to use your privilege for good. And while I'll be completely honest and say the Prime Minister wasn't flourishing in his conversational abilities, I did talk about what Loughborough Students' Union is doing to make sure that race equality is high on our agenda, and I asked him to reflect how he's doing it with his UK population. And it wasn't the time or the place for him to get into a fantastical debate with me, but I was in that instance able to use my privilege and have a conversation and make the Prime Minister have something stick in his mind about a visit that he came to the Students' Union.
Thank you, Alex. And the next question is, do you think the union's close relationship with the university hinders the section's ability to lobby for minority issues?
I will try and take a different tact, but it relates very similarly to my previous answer. I think that you should absolutely use your privilege to your advantage. I'm completely cognizant that to many, I may look like a wonderfully average white cisgender male. And I will also be completely honest and say that I am not representative of every single minority and liberation group. No, that cannot be. But what I am is in a position of privilege, and I consider myself a strong ally of as many minority liberation groups and communities that I can. And you use that privilege for good. You use that privilege to get yourselves into those high-level conversations, to develop personal and professional relationships with people who can enact change, and you be a damned good ally at the highest level that you can be. So at the moment, the relationship that we have with our university, I think, is fully beneficial for minority and liberation groups and communities' aims.
There, Alex. And so our next question is, how can LSU better support researchers struggling with their mental health? And what is LSU doing to help postgraduate researchers balance the demands of childcare?
So a very good question, and certainly a community that often we overlook. I think it starts with understanding what postgraduate researchers' individual needs are. And I think we need to stop referring to them as a homogenous group. And that was always one of my issues coming into this role. They're not, they have absolutely individual needs, as does any other student. But postgraduate researchers may be particularly diverse for a number of reasons. We have many international postgraduate researchers. We have many mature postgraduate researchers. We have many with children. And you need to understand their individual needs and what those particular groups may need and want. And I believe fully with what Anna said, that sentiment is that it should be everyone's responsibility to ensure we're including everyone in the Loughborough family. I so happen to be able to make things happen with regards to well-being and support. But that in itself is a broad remit. Support, I think, comes under making sure that your voice is heard. And I think our senior volunteers who are postgraduate researchers making their voice heard, that allows them to later on be supported. And provided they have allies in the right place, and I strongly consider myself an ally, we can be getting things done. But most definitely, it needs to be in consultation with as many postgraduate researchers as we possibly can to understand the individual needs. And again, I will not profess to be an expert on what it's like to be a postgraduate researcher who is also a parent. That sounds like it has a unique set of challenges. And I'd be very, very keen, especially in light of the recent events that Anna touched on earlier, I'd be very, very keen to work with our postgraduate researchers to see how we can better support them and their mental health, their well-being, especially as parents.
And follow up to that is, how successful do you think the introduction has been for the postgraduate officer on the Welfare and Diversity Committee in relation to your manifesto?
I try and be as objective and as analytical as I can be. And largely Welfare and Diversity is a qualitative section. We go by the ethos that it's about making one impact to one person, one time. And that, for me, is a key aim with the postgraduate welfare and diversity officer. But what I was particularly keen to do is allow it to be an established role within the welfare and diversity section to develop a presence, to begin to lay the foundations for relationships between the university, postgraduates, welfare and diversity, and therein LSU in its wider format. And so far, Hannah, the postgraduate welfare and diversity officer, I have been thrilled with her work so far, and I have been working with her closely to support her work. She's got some brilliant ideas. She's very, very passionate about postgraduate representation. And right now, we're trying to get our way through the teething process of creating an entirely new role without a committee that exists as it does right now. And so we're developing those foundations. We're only halfway through. I'll be conducting an evaluation. We're currently going through committee appraisals, but I'll be conducting an evaluation at the end of her tenure and evaluating where we can go to progress the role, progress the representation. And hopefully by then it will be a success, but with much further room to grow.
Thank you for that. And the next question is, what progress has been made to introduce the weekend support services you outlined in your manifesto? What has hindered its progress, and do you have a date when this will be available?
So a very good question, and I think it's absolutely fair to use manifesto points as a basis for challenge completely. So my fundamental reason for wanting to introduce the weekend support services was because I identified a hole where I thought support was needed. I'll be fair to Loughborough University and say that we do have a plethora of student support services, albeit as they are across the sector rather. They are, I guess, underfunded for the demand that it has, and that is the case everywhere, and models need to be continually evaluated. And so what COVID-19 has thrown us is a big old curveball, and we've had to completely ensure that our priority support services are in place. And this is where colleagues at the university who are working with their financial structures, working with their priorities to deliver support services. It's where they have been working in consultation with me to ensure that the frontline support services available to students can function. Like, how does counselling work? They've been working to make sure that appointments can be made in person, online, over telephone, so that people who do need in-person support can access in-person support. But in order to cope with demand and the circumstances we face ourselves in, that it does move to a more flexible model. So something like weekend support services is not viable this year, and I was under no illusion that it was going to be viable this year in a non-COVID world anyway, because it's a long-term strategy. It's proposing a big support service that needs to be self-sustainable. You need to make sure that the money you're bringing in to fund that service, you need to make sure you're taking it out from an appropriate place. It requires financial restructure, and I'm fully aware of that, and I did not anticipate to bring it in this year. What COVID has done is nothing really, I think, in terms of the planning towards it. I can still come up with business proposals. I can still open conversations, but this was inevitably something that was going to be succeeding me in my tenure.
Excellent. And the final question is, has there been any safeguarding training delivered to all LSU staff? You promised to deliver this yourself, have you?
So when I was evaluating that manifesto point when I came into the role, I wanted to evaluate the origin of why I wanted to implement this training specifically. I felt that there was a gap in our staff feeling properly equipped to fully support everyone who interacted with our venue. Upon further digging, further research, I identified more areas that I thought staff could benefit from specific training on. And it grew and grew. And I chatted with Matt about this, and he's brought in union-led project management boards and has facilitated the opportunity for me to lead an entire project management board, specifically looking at the entire training process for every staff member at LSU. Not an easy task, not a small task. I think there's value and benefit in short-term plaster solutions, but I also think there's huge value in looking towards a long-term endemic issue and coming up with a solution. So I'm going to be leading on that long-term solution. And in the short term, I don't see why some of my passionate volunteers who have been developing training programs of themselves, Neve Fields in the Disability Support Network, for example, she and her committee have developed disability awareness training. We've recently introduced the Sunflower Lanyard Hidden Disabilities Scheme at LSU that, again, allows and opens doors for further training to be implemented. Conversations are happening to ensure that Sunflower Lanyards can be rolled out across campus too. And all these little pockets of availability for training are becoming more and more available and more viable. So I'm facilitating those opportunities in collaboration with my student volunteers as well. But the safeguarding training has grown into a longer term project, which I'm really, really excited to report on hopefully later on in my tenure.
Excellent, thank you guys. So following that and the recent developments of the Ideas Forum, let's see how Matt and Fujiro, our Vice President, reacted to questions posted on there.
Yes, where it was like drain the LSU swamp.
I'm surprised that how many votes has this one got at the moment?
So a lot. I think this is probably the third highest, 107. Yeah.
And so it should be. No, it's a good idea. Although it's one of those things that is quite Loughborough about it because it's absolutely an inconvenience to every single person that has ever walked that path. But at the same time, you're quite fond of it, and it's just like, oh, that's just part of Loughborough.
Removing charges. So this is the sort of superstar idea now. The most votes there's ever been on an idea on the Ideas Forum, removing mitigation circumstances. So 230. That shatters the previous record.
It was an idea that was submitted by Alana last year, and now she's resubmitted it, and because everyone's riding the wave of the Ideas Forum at the moment, it's absolutely skyrocketed, and so it should. It's a really good idea.
Porn Star Martini, the second most popular idea on the Ideas Forum, 138 votes.
So hang on a minute, have we got to a point where more students are concerned about having Porn Star Martini on tap than sorting out a flooding path? I think that's a fantastic symbol of where Loughborough is. Yes. As a former resident of Falkirk, I can absolutely get behind this one. It's such a nuisance, particularly when you get all the way up there and you think you've made it before the cut-off point, and then you get there and it's locked. Then you have to go back down. You have to go through the tennis centre. Yes, absolutely on board with this. Well done, Rebecca.
I mean, yes, as well. I think a lot of people sort of resonate with the feeling of having to spend all their time in Hazel Grave and then wanting to get a snack, but then having no cash.
The pessimist inside me says the benefit this idea will have on the student body would the students will have to study in there, as in they wouldn't have to walk to the union to get a cup of coffee. But the part of me is like, I quite like students coming to the union to get a cup of coffee because we get the money. If I was a student who had an excellent idea and wanted to submit it to the Ideas Forum, how do I submit my idea?
Oh, it's super duper easy. You just go to lsu.co.uk/Ideas Forum. And there's a big green button right at the top of the screen that says, I have an idea. Click that button and you can fill out the form.
Welcome back, everyone. So our next set of questions are focused around COVID-19. So this one's to everyone. Do you believe that the COVID Community Challenge has been a major success? We'll start with Alex, and let's try and keep these responses as brief as we can.
Fantastic. I think it's been a tremendous success. The timeline that we were able to turn this around and make a fully functioning voluntary delivery scheme is just absolutely fantastic. And we've been able to build on that as well. Fortunately, I've been able to implement some self-care and self-isolation leaflets. We purchased 10,000 to ensure that every student in self-isolation receiving a parcel could also get a few tips and some signposting resources to help them in self-isolation. I think overall it's been a fantastic success and a great way for the Loughborough community to really get together for a fantastic cause.
Thank you, Alex. Anna, if you want to give your thoughts on that.
When you said short answer, my first reaction was yes. But no, indeed, it has. And what I've realized is that when you're in the middle of the storm, you don't really see how much positive change you're making. And I particularly remember, and this is one of my favorite highlights as a sabbatical officer, I was sat with these two and the other executive officers that are currently leading on different groups called silver groups that are taking care of this. And I just caught myself going, let's stop for a second and appreciate how much of a fantastic and incredible work we've managed to do in 48 hours. I do think it's been very successful. It's given students something to look forward to, and those that still wish to volunteer and really be there for their community had the opportunity to do so, and those that were really in need had the support that was necessary. And I think CCC filled in the gap that the university wasn't providing in a really good way, in a very supportive way. So,
thank you. And finally, Matt.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, I'm going to agree and say yes. And it's the impact of it is being felt by students. It's being felt by their parents, by their carers. It's being used as a blueprint. It's been copied by the University of Nottingham, by Swansea University. LSU was the first in the country to create this kind of a scheme. It's being talked at cabinet level. That's the highest committee in the government. It's the one that the Prime Minister chairs. So the impact of CCC is being felt primarily by Loughborough students, the most important that if we impact. But it's also being talked about up and down the United Kingdom, and for that I am very, very proud of the team and the volunteers.
Thank you all for that. So our next question is for Anna. Are we going to return to face-to-face learning next term? And do you have any idea what semester 2 will look like?
Genuine answer, I don't know. I think this is something that it's one of those things that are still being discussed and decided on because of the of how little we know about what this is going to look like in a few months. I think it's safe to assume that the higher education sector has been moving week by week in terms of what has been happening and what has been decided on. So I think the university has done a fantastic job at giving the students the opportunity to have blended delivery, either through dual mode or ensuring that at least the lab, workshop, seminar provision and tutorial provisions have been put into place for students to engage with in person. I envision that they're going to do something similar, if applicable, and the more lenience they have, the more they're going to increase that in terms of actual contact hours. But I don't think anyone knows at this point.
Yeah, no, that's completely understandable given current events. And finally, Matt, in your manifesto, you talked about tackling loneliness and social isolation. How do you feel you have done in this period of history where these issues are the greatest they have ever been?
Absolutely, they are the greatest they have ever been, and I think primarily it's being able to tackle it hand in hand with the university, because you're absolutely right, Josh. When it comes to a student that is forced to self-isolate for 14 days, irrespective of whether they live in a house in town with friends they've had from first or second year, or indeed if they live in a household bubble in university accommodation, they may be a first year with students they've never met before. Tackling the emotions and feelings associated with loneliness and social isolation are absolutely paramount, and which is where it's manifested itself in a way I never expected, certainly never expected when it came to thinking about how to tackle self-isolation and loneliness in a pandemic. But actually, the work we are doing through CCC and COVID Community Champions is helping to tackle that. It's providing a tangible link to the outside world, as it were, if a student is self-isolating or indeed lonely during lockdown. And the challenge for the officer team now is we've created this scaffold of a structure in 48 hours, as I've already touched upon, but the challenge for us going forwards is now to build that permanent structure. How can we utilise what we've created through CCC to develop it going into the next calendar year for the inevitable slight increase in cases we will see with the return of students after Christmas, but going forwards into new academic years, how can we use CCC to support students who are lonely going forward? So I think whilst unexpected, the pandemic has been a bit of a blessing in that sense because it's resulted in the creation of CCC, and I want to use that as a springboard going forward to continue to tackle loneliness and social isolation.
Thank you for that, Matt. And we're going to go on to our next section based on activities and events here at LSU. And our first question is for Anna. And I think it's the question that's on the lips of every finalist here at Loughborough is, are we going to have a graduation and what will this look like?
I hate to repeat myself, really, Josh, but I don't know. And I think it's my responsibility to be as honest as I possibly can with the students. I don't know. I don't think anyone does, really, because it's such an ever-changing environment. The second we make decisions that we cannot revert back from, it's actually going to be more disheartening to the students than those that we are waiting out to hear from. So once this is obviously made available in terms of information that has been decided by university colleagues with support from union colleagues, we will make sure to let students know. And I believe me when I say staff are looking forward to graduation as much as students are. And I know it's probably like something very easy to overlook, but they're there on the students' journey. They are literally there with them. They see them grow. They see them develop in the people that they become. And they're looking forward to it just as much as the students are. So the second this will be, it will be safe for such a big event to be put into place, I am certain that they will be the first to know and the first to champion that within the student communities that they work in.
Thank you for that, Anna. And our next question is for Alex. Welfare and diversity prides itself on not requiring membership. How can you justify this in a time where the union is financially struggling?
Because, Josh, you shouldn't have to pay to be gay or wage to be a woman. You should not have to opt in with some sort of financial reimbursement to be part of a minority or liberation group or community that you have no choice in.
That's an answer there. We'll move on to our next question, which is for everyone. Do you believe there is a divide between the top 5 exec and the section chairs? What are the exec doing to support the section chairs on a day-to-day basis? And we'll start with Matt.
Thank you very much, Josh. I guess it makes sense to turn to me first. I will provide 2 answers. One is no, I don't think there is a divide, but 2 is I hope there isn't a divide, because one of the great benefits for me this year as a returning officer has been able to grow and develop the structure that we have in place with 5 executive officers and 6 section chairs, which we only introduced last year, remember. That last year was the first iteration of it. And so far, all of the feedback I've received from the whole of the officer team has been incredibly positive, but I hope that I've created a culture amongst the executive that should they feel out of place, that they can have that conversation, be it with me or Fajira as the vice president. But none of those conversations are taking place at the moment, and certainly I'm getting no inkling that that is the case. And I hope to students looking in from the outside that they see the executive as a collective, cohesive entity who are required to be so strong this year, now more than ever.
Thank you for that. And our final question on this topic is for Alex. With increasing social awareness of issues such as cultural appropriation, gender and sexuality, it is obviously important that themes and costume ideas for events are reviewed before being published. Do you think that there is a danger, however, that there may be a tendency to go overboard with rules and deny some themes that are unlikely to cause issues, therefore ending some popular traditions in halls, clubs and societies?
I think that's a really interesting question, but I also think it's really important to acknowledge nuance and to judge things on a case-by-case basis. I think we can agree blackface is not something you should do. Dressing as a Native American for a Cowboys and Indians party is not really something you should do. Whether you want to have a pride party in your hall to celebrate the LGBT plus community. That's a nuance that I think should be reviewed. Why are you having that space? Is it being created by LGBT plus people to celebrate LGBT plus people? Or is it not being created by those people to celebrate those people? Or is it being created by allies to support those people? If so, you should be taking every possible step. If your theme or your costume impacts or has some sort of relevance to a community, you should be making every step to make sure that that community is included in the decision making of this and also in the festivity of it. I certainly don't think traditions which are harmful to individuals should be kept. Full stop.
Excellent answer. And that concludes that section. So now we're going to move on to the future of LSU and the next exec. The first question here is for Matt. The performance review of the executive team has yet to be carried out in a consistent manner. Can you ensure that this year the outcomes of performance review will not be dismissed and that the executive will be held accountable in order to make progress in the work they are doing, even if this means they may take negative criticism?
That's a really, really interesting question. Can I assure that we will get the performance review process right this year? No, because we haven't done it this year. But what I can say is that Fajira is leading on this as the Vice President and the officer that oversees democracy and representation, but we are tweaking it this year because it's still not perfect. And if something isn't perfect, we should strive to make it as perfect or as close to perfect as is possible. And last year, I felt like it didn't work, and that was a view shared by the executive. And therefore, we worked with the Democracy and Representation Committee to ensure that we are able to tweak it to make it more polished and more refined. And changes are still taking place, and we're still going to get it not quite right, but we are continuing to strive to get it right. And when it comes to accountability and officers taking feedback on board, absolutely we do. And if an officer didn't take feedback on board, irrespective of whether it came from a colleague, a student, a volunteer, a staff member, then if they're not prepared to take feedback on board, then a conversation needs to take place, because irrespective of who it comes from, feedback is one of the best tools that you can utilise as an individual to learn and grow from it. So yes, you may not have liked the feedback, still got to take it on board.
And I guess the follow-up to that is, additionally, what plans do you have in place to make the performance review process consistent across the years, as opposed to the next exec team changing it all once again?
Well, I'm sorry to say that this will be my last year at LSU, so I can have absolutely no impact whatsoever on what happens next year. But equally, that is not me washing my hands clean of it. I think what's so important is that we continue to develop a process that hopefully this year works. And if it does work, that's where the handover period becomes so crucial for the new team, because there is absolutely no point whatsoever in us creating a process if the next year's team would just rip it up, which is not what we've done this year. We've tweaked it this year, and which is what we've done in previous years as well. So I think when it comes to handing over to my successor, and indeed the jury, the Vice President's successor, those conversations take place involving the chair of the Democracy and Representation Committee to work out what is the best route to take forward from that.
Thank you for that, Matt. And our next question is for Anna. This year, the school presidents and the course representatives were appointed. Why was this decision made?
There were plenty of reasons as to why we've made that choice, but I think I'm going to focus on the one that I deem to seem most important really in this conversation, and so have my colleagues. So historically, what would happen when it comes to school president and course representative election is that we would have maybe one or two people put themselves forward for one role, and then on average we would have 1 to 3 votes. What that means is that they would self-elect themselves, really. Students didn't have to fill in a manifesto if they didn't want to. Students didn't have to put a picture on. They didn't have to campaign. They didn't have to do anything more unless they really wanted to, if that makes sense. So with an appointment process, what we have done in consultation with the executive officers, Professor Rachel Thompson, academic representation, the ADT, so Associate Deans of Teaching, and the old school president team as well, we have put in place a process whereby students must say why they want the role and how they are going to contribute towards it and explain a bit of their thinking behind it. So think about it as a manifesto process, really. Once that has been done, 3 members on the panel would have reviewed each application individually. So the 3 members are 2 permanent staff members within academic representation, and then the executive officer that oversees that and champions that scheme, executive officer. The 3 panel members would come together and then discuss them one by one, which means discussing over 500 to 600 applications one by one, just to make sure we don't miss out on anything and that we have the best way going forward. At most, we've had 21 applications for 1 role, which has never, ever in the history of academic representation happened before. And that only goes to say that this has been the first year we've ever done it. We still need to improve on it. We still need to improve in terms of actually raising visibility of it. We have colleagues within academic schools that have yet to improve upon it from their side of things as well. But obviously, the only way we're going to know that we've succeeded is if the next team are going to do it even better. And I have every single hope in my heart that they are, because they're guided by incredible staff within LSU advice and academic representation.
Thank you for that. And the follow-up is, were there other avenues on how to increase voting engagement considered before the decision was made to appoint them? And if not, do you think this is the end of course rep elections, and are they going to be appointed now for going forward?
I think there are always ways to explore things in different avenues, really, or through different avenues. But if you look even at the highest elections that we put on our campus, which are the executive elections, arguably the number, when you look at the ratio, you can't say that you've had 80% of students vote in the executive officers, right? And the more you drip down through kind of granular elections, the less votes you get, or the fewer votes, sorry. So when we looked at that, we said, we're going through the middle of a pandemic. It is very unlikely that students are going to be able to campaign for the roles. How about we try to see what this process would lead to? If it was disastrous, we would have intervened and we would have reverted immediately and obviously make recommendations for next year. But I think what we're moving towards now is review the process again to draw some conclusions and reflect on what has been going well, what hasn't been going well, and see where we can improve. But kind of looking at other sections and how appointments have been working for other student representatives, we thought it would be appropriate for us to give it our best and see what this process would lead to.
Excellent. Thank you there, Anna. Our next question is for Matt again. Back on the soapbox, you said that the president is a redundant position and the union executive should move to a flat structure. Will you be making this change in the time for next year? And if not, why?
Really good question. Well remembered, Josh. My answer to that is still no, potentially not, but it could happen. Those conversations are yet to take place with the executive, and I think if it is a change that impacts the executive, that conversation should first take place with them, and it should be a consultancy process before it is thrown out to the wider student body, primarily through the Democracy and Representation Committee. I do think there is a benefit in some instances to a flat structure. Equally, there are benefits to having a single individual that you can all turn to in a point of crisis, and events of earlier this academic year prove that. So it's all about weighing up those two aspects of it, but those conversations will certainly take place, and I'm excited to have them and excited to hear the executive officer's thoughts on it.
Thank you, Matt. And our next question comes in from Twitter. So let's see it on the screen. Matt, why aren't the LSU governance documents on the LSU website?
What a wonderfully niche question. I will be honest, Josh. I don't find myself looking at the governance pages of the LSU website very often, simply because I've got them on my computer already. But I will go away and investigate that for you. And I'm pleased to say one of the benefits of being president is that I can send off an email and it will undoubtedly happen.
Excellent, thank you. And our next question is to all of you. When is LSU moving into the new building that's been proposed? I'm going to start with Alex.
I don't know, dear. I don't know. Matt.
Do you want me to jump in straight away, Josh? Yeah? Okay. So I can provide a little bit more context. Okay, so before the pandemic, LSU was due to move into the new building in April 2024. That was after a consultancy and obviously then building it. I'm sorry to say that as a result of the pandemic, Both the union and the university have had to look at capital projects and reallocate resources to preserve existing facilities and services. And as a result, we are expecting a delay in the new union building. It could be upwards of 5 years, simply because the pandemic has had such an impact on finances, as everybody knows, with wider society as well. But LSU just hasn't stopped at that point and just gone, oh gosh, it's going to be another 5 years. And instead, we're putting money into the current building and ensuring that it's still an enjoyable place to be. And we've got some really exciting projects coming up that will be happening over Christmas. So I can't wait to show students that on their return.
And Anna, if you've got any thoughts you want to add?
I've got no clue, Josh, really. I'm going to follow suit with Alex, but I trust every single thing that Matthew has said to be correct.
Excellent. Our next question is for Matt again. The media section chair is the only unpaid member of the officer team, and they are the only section chair without a full-time member of staff dedicated to directly supporting them. What support have you provided the media chair this year?
Okay, so there's a slight inaccuracy in the second half of that, because it's not the only officer that has a dedicated staff member to support them. Bless her, Anna on the call here doesn't have anybody. Well, she does, but she has a member of staff that is split between 3 people, the other 2 being myself and the Vice President. So support for the media chair, and of course Cameron is our media chair this year. When I first took up the role of President, I worked closely with Fajira to determine how we were going to support the entire officer team. And as a result, we decided that I, as President, would primarily oversee, mentor and coach the 4 other executive officers, and Fajira would lead on section chair support. That he has done, and that he has done very well. And I hope that Cameron feels just as supported as any other officer in the executive, and certainly feedback we've received so far suggests that. And so Fajira's work has been outstanding on that, and we are continuing to support Cameron. And we are continuing to constantly evaluate all of the resources that we provide to all of our sections. And those are conversations that are ongoing. Indeed, last week I had a conversation with the entire officer team talking about resource allocation. So there may well be changes in the future, and we will always consider new possibilities.
I guess in follow-up to that then, is the media chair going to be paid again, or are the section chairs eventually not going to be paid either, keeping in mind that LSU still has one of the largest sabbatical teams in the country?
Yes, it does, although I did see a students' union the other day, and I'm not going to name drop them, but I did see that they have just elected 18 officers onto it, and that was only part 1 of their election. So we are by far and away not the largest, but we are a sizable officers team. Is there an intention to make any other section chairs a voluntary role? Absolutely not. Is there potential that the media chair could become a paid role again? Absolutely yes. But I won't be drawn on that because conversations haven't taken place yet, but they will undoubtedly take place.
Thank you. And our final question for this section, I'll address it to you first, Matt, but if either Alex or Anna want to chime in, feel free. And that is, how are exec elections going to work this year?
Can I just say what Anna says and says I don't know? But no, I'm kidding. We've already started to think about that. And Fajira, as Vice President, of course, leads on exec elections. If the current restrictions continue into February, firstly, goodness help us all, but secondly, it will undoubtedly result in an exec election that looks very different this year. But conversations are already taking place in terms of how we can deliver elections digitally, if needs be 100% digitally, but also a blended model. And we're fortunate in the sense, actually, that LSU exec elections are fairly early on in the calendar year compared to other sabbatical officer elections at other students' unions. And as a result, when it came to the first lockdown period, other students' unions were holding their elections at the time, which means that we've got some blueprints that we can utilise already, and we're already considering them. But I cannot give you a concrete answer at the moment because A, that would be stealing Fajiro's thunder, and B, because we haven't sorted out the finer details.
Thanks, Matt. And either to Alex or Anna, if you have any thoughts on that you want to add?
Nothing too significant other than potentially we could increase the accessibility of exec elections. I think things moving online have made it accessible to those who prefer to utilize online resources. And I think we should see it as you can in many instances that COVID-19 has forced upon us. You can see it as an opportunity to increase engagement. So I'm sure we will seize that opportunity.
And finally, Anna, if you have any words.
I wanted to touch upon what Alex has mentioned. I think, should it have to be remotely, I think that model is going to lend itself really well to certain students that may not necessarily want to actively campaign during elections week, not in the same manner that we have seen in the past. I think from where I'm sat, I am definitely considering ways in which I can engage better with students to really explain what my role is and how they can see it. And I plan to run workshops with my senior volunteers and education volunteers as a whole, hopefully starting December, to really give them a bit of insight into what I do on a daily basis, what my role looks like, and encourage them to start thinking about it way ahead of the time. And I think this is a model that we've been really encouraging all throughout the year. The exec elections are no longer a beautifully wrapped up gift that just is given to the students. It's actually been, the information has actually been disseminated from the beginning of the student's journey this year. And I think that's really, really important because it changes focus from one particular time to actually allowing students to self-reflect, learn more about it, and really be curious and hopefully courageous and comfortable to ask us any questions that they may have throughout the year as well.
Excellent, thank you. And our final question is to all of you. What are you most looking forward to in the remainder of your term in office? And if we can try to keep our answers short. Thank you.
So I'm looking forward to seeing the officers continuing to grow and develop and therefore impacting students, because life as a sabbatical is so fast-paced that you are absolutely thrown into the middle of it at the time when you've got to just tread water, and then you start to grow and develop and putting your ideas into place. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the team facilitating opportunities and growing and developing as individuals as well.
And Alex?
Well, I'm just looking forward to just carrying on. I think it's been important for all of us to not dwell or get too down about how our roles will be and have been this year. And I'm just really excited to potentially be the only Welfare Diversity EO who saw us through COVID. Fingers crossed that it doesn't happen for whoever succeeds me. But I'm also just really looking forward to seeing what the rest of the Welfare Diversity Committee are doing online, socially distanced, sometimes in person if the restrictions allow, because they are really the people that keep the section ticking over, and they're the really passionate people that make things happen, and they're only halfway through.
Lovely. And last but not least, Anna.
Thank you very much, Josh. I really hope I speak on behalf of all of us through my own reflection, but I'm looking forward to seeing my volunteers and staff. I have been working since March, and I have continuously been delivering remotely, which has meant that a lot of my provision has been moved to 100% online. I see my volunteers on a weekly basis, really, but I just cannot wait for the day when I actually get to see them face to face and I actually get to meet them and talk to them. Because as a SAB that heavily relies on students, it's so important to be able to have that extra push, even during the most challenging of days, as well as the staff that we haven't been able to see. And I think this is something that is definitely resonated amongst the exec group. I'm even looking forward to seeing the whole exec together, because now we're working on a different model. So it's really important for me that we get to say proper hello and goodbye by the end of our term as well.
Lovely, thank you all. So that concludes the first edition of the Exec Forum. Thank you very much to Anna, Alex and Matt for joining us remotely, for you guys at home for sending your questions in, and to the team in the gallery here for getting this show up and running given the circumstances. So make sure you follow LSU Media on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube for further updates. Thank you and have a good evening.